Okay, so welcome back to the sessions, right? Lela kindly asked me if I can take over this, and make an introduction, right? So first of all, I would like to welcome you all to the session on the explorations and the implications of sustainable public procurement part of the conference. My name is Spruk. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Economics and Business at the University of Ljubljana. And today I will be also chairing the session, our session today, right? So today we have 4 very interesting papers on the schedule, right? I would briefly like to, I will say a few words about the individual speakers, right? So our first speaker in the current session is David Lopez with a very interesting paper on digital innovation for sustainability, an exploration of the synergies between technological innovation and sustainability in public procurement, right? David, are you here? Yeah, okay.
Yes, I'm here. I'm having some troubles with my connection, but I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you perfectly, right? Okay, so every speaker, as far as I'm informed, every speaker has about
I'm just in trouble with the camera.
Every speaker has about 20 minutes for presentation, right? So when your presentation will be nearing the completion or nearing the 20 minutes threshold, I will just raise a hand, right, and let you know when the completion is approaching, right? Okay, so David, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes for the presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to share with you my presentation. I'm having some trouble connecting. You can hear me well, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Oh. Okay. While I share my presentation, I will just like to thank the committee, the work academic committee of the conference, for giving me the chance to present my contribution to the conference, and especially to Professor Mélon, which I had the good opportunity to be a student of her this year in my master's studies at the Pompeu Fabra University. So thank you very much. It's for me a great pleasure to be alongside this very remarkable maybe I can speak a little bit of the topic that I or Sanchez in relation to the connections that could be drawn between digital technologies and technological innovation in relation with public procurement. I don't know if you can see now the presentation. I think it's now ready. So basically, the route that I will take in this short presentation. First, on these things. Secondly, I would also like to make also some introductory notes regarding the reasons and the justifications that one could establish in relation to the inclusion of horizontal considerations in public procurement. This means not only environmental, social, and technological. Procuring for innovation in the terms that technological innovation can be the object of public procurement. And secondly, another to strengthen the implementation of public procurement. So first, okay, I don't know if my connection is right or not. It's I don't know. I think it has some problems with someone. I don't know if I should. I will continue. You can also follow the presentation. It is more or less the quite a summary of the topics that I selected. So first, the reasons that sparked my interest in this topic are related to changes their impact across our human experience. Okay, I will try to turn off my camera. I don't know if that works. Maybe the connection will be better. So as I was saying, this issue of climate change has impacts that affects us in many ways. And as it is a complex issue, it also needs for some integrated solutions in which law and technological innovation can be a driver for change and can be a piece in this huge puzzle that is climate change, and they can be helpful for having our current situation. Also, a topic that has received technological innovation, technological innovation subtlety has not received the same amount of interest from the academy. So it's interesting to explore which are the connections, the synergies, the point of convergences, and how sustainable public procurement can enter in connection and in conversation with the introduction of technological innovations within the process of public procurement. So basically, the question that drive my investigation was how technological innovation mechanisms that there are many diverse technological innovation mechanisms, such as emerging technologies such as machine learning or artificial intelligence. There's also the issue of standardization, and as Professor Sanchez also mentioned, the topic of the digitalization of all the procurement procedures in each of the stages of the procurement, which can be powerful a framework and it can also provide public authorities and the economic operators in which they are in contract with effective tools for the management, execution, the supervision, and the monitoring of the public procurement, always with these orientations towards having a procedure oriented towards sustainability. So at the beginning, I wanted to make like this preliminary question investigation, which was, why is it justified the inclusion of horizontal considerations in public procurements? Why can we incorporate concerns related to sustainability or to social issues or to technological innovation within the framework of public procurement? And there are many procurement may be incorporated, how the this inclusion may be useful in terms of value-driven arguments, which have at the center the idea that public procurement can be that can influence the behavior actors. We have to understand that the inclusion of the considerations in public procurement is not new. And it's also quite a shift that we can also see is more or less in the private sector of moving away from methods of production for the environment and for social issues. In this sense, the state as a buyer can act driver in terms of encouraging this shift. This is done by influencing the production mode. By lowering the prices of these goods and services, in the sense that if the state is buying more of these services, it can act and stimulate capacities of firms. So this is basically the central ideas of what is justified to incorporate these horizontal considerations within all these reasons that emerge from market tool, and there are also some normative justifications or reasons that make possible the operation. This is basically in regarding to the normative framework for the incorporation of these considerations. Of intervention, environmental intervention based on Article 11, in connection also the has also a goal for sustainable development within and also the public procurement package of directives of 2000. The whole justifies that for the incorporation of these considerations. That doesn't mean that just application to always incorporate environmental, social, or procurement activities, but aspects into account when they are on each of the state, take it at least into account. Sorry, I'm trying to. I don't know if you can hear me now better. Because I have a little problem with my connection. Dr. Spruk? Or I also okay. It opens. Continue. I hope that the connection was better now. So, we might presentation, there's this first element within the analysis of technological innovation in regards to public procurement, which is information, which means that technological procurement, in the sense that of public procurement, they help to provide some procedures that can be useful procuring this technology for helping not only also economic operators in the process. For instance, series of research and development with an economic operations, and it is a helpful tool when the need that the to cover is not it doesn't have a good or a service that can provide that can satisfy that, the market. So what is established in is a regime of shared risk benefits among the public the economic operator in terms of trying to come an innovative solution for the authority has identified. And also here that can be useful for procurement technological innovation, which is the procurement of innovative technology. There is a model or a protocol enhance or improve or type or model, and there are the technology such as additive dialogue. So in of how technology within procurement and sales side is not procurement for innovation, but with innovation, which means digitalize ethics or blockchain, and also the digitalization of having a complete Dr. Sanchez, if there's accountability about data architecture and procurement, and there's also issues on accountability. But it can also be helpful for optimizing the operation of public procurement, increasing its efficiency, having a safer, providing greater transparency overall to the so in this stage of my presentation, I want to contribute to what Professor Sanchez has already mentioned about the complexity of to apply these new technologies within the process of public procurement. And what I wanted to try to provide a few technologies have been applied. The first one related to the slide. this has in the experience of the New South Wales in Australia. Basically, what happened is that the station developed called the categorization of artificial, which basically helps different types of procurement spending that they have based extracted from a general ledger that they have previous experience. And what happened, what was it shows, it demonstrates that it is important good quality data that can be useful for instance, in the technological that is the new data that is provided as an input. This a greater data architecture framework in order for these emerging technologies to work correctly. So I'm experiencing to the creation of a chatbot that can be useful for interpret users of the procurement office can have, and then to the different functions. It can be a relative easy and it can enhance the performance of the basically environment. It didn't have a unified mechanism for the information related to public procurement. So basically, a digital mechanism that standardize the information within the and it uses the data that is extracted and which transform it into an open contracting data standard that a greater transparency of the by the public officials from Belarus. And finally, another experience in Korea in which a regional council had basically a paper-based procurement and transparent and trustworthy by of the procurement process. So they basically set up a digital tendering platform and couple it provide a better that provide a greater transparency to the economic operation that participated in the procurement procedure, and it was successfully integrated within the platform and give greater security information. So I would like just to close my some of the challenges that we can identify in relation to this to the application of this new to privacy and security and integrated in these new technologies. There are many sensible mention to the bidders that participate in the process. But maybe I could suggest is that from the design, it can be applied some proper measures and protection. universally sensible information. And second, is in terms of the accountability of these administrative and policy decisions that are taken with the support from technological mechanisms such as in or artificial intelligence. It is different these decisions and by research that there's of having an accountability on this type of systems, type of technology, also by starting from the design of the technological model itself. Basically, it tries to arrange and provide information on how the computer operations and the analysis performed by the system, and they provide an ex-ante mechanism by the parameters and standards established for the. So I'm really sorry for the technology. I hope that you maybe have a grasp idea and the general idea to present to you. You can also have a and I'm open to my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, David Andres, for a nice presentation, right? Does the audience or the other speakers and participants, do you have any questions for David? Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, then I would like to commence with the presentation, with the second presentation. So our second speaker is Yunhee Kim from South Korea, right? So Yunhee just wrote that because of the times of differentiated access only now. Okay, so yes, Yunhee, you may start with the presentation. You have about 20 minutes for the presentation, and I will be the one in charge of time enforcement, right? You may also share your screen, right? So it's very easy. Basically, on the bottom right corner, you may choose a squared folder with an arrow. Well, and this will show up as a shared content. So just click it, and then you can share your presentation.
Okay.
And let me know if it works.
So you mean I just move my presentation to the section on the screen?
Yes, you have to share. You have to share the presentation with us, right?
Yes. Yes, I can see the area where I can share the contents, but how can I move my presentation file to this section?
So actually, when you click the share content, right, there another window pops out saying share content, primary content, and then you can choose share application screen, right? And then with the share screen option, you have three options: share your entire screen or show your share your application window. So you click share you click application window, and then you just click the presentation, whether you have it in PDF or PowerPoint, right?
Okay, I can see your explanation, but since I'm not the speaker and the chair, so I cannot share any contents. There is a message from the screen.
Okay.
They say my position is not the speaker. I'm just attender, so I cannot share my content.
Oh, okay.
When you see the list of participation, you can see my name in the under section. I belong to
Okay.
the
Okay.
participation. That's why I cannot share my presentation file. Sorry for this delay.
Okay,
but
sure.
Yeah. Can you move?
Yeah, because I see here
Yeah.
you're listed among participants,
Yes.
but not among
That's why I
presenters. Okay.
cannot share my file.
Okay.
Okay, let me try it again.
Okay, now you are designated as a presenter, so I think it should work.
Yeah. So now it's uploading. Please wait a few seconds. I'm very sorry about this.
Yeah, sure. Just fine. It looks great.
Thank you.
Okay, so Yunhee, you have about 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. This is my great pleasure to see my researchers in the same area. So I'm Yunhee Kim. I'm senior economist at the National Assembly Budget Office in Korea. The title of my presentation is The Analysis of the Korean Green Public Procurement in the Supply Factors. So from now, I will just call it as a GPP instead of Green Public Procurement. So let me start my presentation. So first of all, I want to give you the general information of Korean public procurement system. So nowadays, the size of Korean public procurement market is almost 10.4 million US dollar. So when we calculate it with our GDP, it's about 7%. And in Korea, we define the sustainable public procurement as the overcoming environmental and economic and social crisis through government procurement policies. So the government prioritizing the procurement of low carbon goods and service supplied by SME and innovative companies. So the Korean government induced this mandatory green GPP program since 2005. So now by law, all the public institutions and governments had to buy the green green public procurement products. And then there is a system. This one is the national online e-procurement system. So as you may know, in Korea, the e-commerce and internet is very well developed. So almost 73% all procurement is done by this online. And then there is a special agency. The agency is a public procurement service. It's a government. And they organize and they manage and they make some budget for this public procurement. So when you see the whole 70% the size of the national public procurement, the 33% is done by this PPS service. And the other one, the 27% is done by their own system. Once the price is above the certain amount, the public institution has their own system to make the contracts. And for the rest, this one is the other small city or the other small institution. So in sum, so all the buyers for the public procurement is managed by the government, and the statistic we can access in Korea. So this is the trends and the size of the Korean domestic public procurement. So we did it from 2005 for GPP, and then you can see the whole size. So the base year is 2007. It's 123 3 billion. This one is 3 billion Korean won, and then it's increasing. And then this is public procurement by SME, and then this one is also showing the number of company, because this study is based on the firm level data. So I wanted to show the increased number of the suppliers. And then this is the current status of GPP. So there are two figures. The left side show the buyers, which types of buyer are buying the GPP in Korea. So local government and central government, and then some education like school, public school, and then public institution like electricity company, or like a water company, this kind of institution. And then the left bar is this blue bar is just public procurement, and then the orange color is green public procurement, and the gray, the triangle means that is the share of green public GPP. So there are clear differences. So which buyer is buying a lot, or which buying is buying less, and we can see. And the right side figure shows the sectors. So mostly the government or this kind of buyers, they are buying some building or construction material for GPP. And there are also computer and office appliance, and then writing and electricity, etc. So this study started at okay, the number of company, the suppliers, and the volume of the GPP has been increased, but it's not changed a lot for the rest few years. So we wanted to find the incentive behind the supply of GPP product. Why? Which factor make the firm try to provide more GPP? And then we checked the previous study, and then there are not so much studies that is using empirical with the firm level data. So as we can access the Korean procurement data, so we used the firm level data. So it has been 13 years since the GPP introduced in Korea, and then now it's easy to get the data. So we decided to check. And then this part is showing the previous study. So as I mentioned, most of the study used survey methods. So that's why one contribution of our study is that with the real company data, we can check which kind of characteristic can promote the incentive of the company, how much, and then why do they supply the GPP. So the dependent, so let me introduce the empirical part. So the dependent variable is just sorry. So there are two dependent variables. So one is whether they supply or not, yes or no. And then the other one is that once they supply, how much did they supply? So those two variables are dependent variable. And then the other part is firm characteristics, so sectors, and then their age, and then their location. And this part is their financial part. And also, we wanted to check the innovation part, whether the R&D can have some significant role for the supply volume and the supply motivation. And then the number of employee and then the wage, because we also want to check the cost parts. And then this figure shows that the distribution of the GPP suppliers, the firm. So the main city in Korea is Seoul. So you can see the 15% are located in Seoul. And then Gyeonggi means that just next to Seoul, the other parts, for example, in France, there is a Paris, and the other part are Ile-de-France. So it's like Ile-de-France. It's next to the big metro city. So these two parts is metropolitan area. So in the for the last part, I will explain you again. But since there are so many cities, so I just divided as two. So I bundle those two parts as metropolitan, and those are not metropolitan. And then there is a distribution for the firm age, and this is a sector. And the next figure shows that the amount. So when the company supply the GPP, how much they sell. So for the metropolitan area, they sell 61%. The other area, 38%. And then this age company supply this amount, and then this is a sector. So when they sell the GPP, the manufacturing, sorry for this Korean, it's mistyping. So this is manufacturing, this is a service, and this is construction. Even the construction side volume was high when you see it with the currency. But when you see the distribution of the sector, mostly it's manufacturing. So we used 4,865 company that supplied green GPP during 2011 and 2017. Even the data started from 2005. There are some limitation to access those data because the quality of the firm level data was not so good. So we decided to use it only for the 7 years. So we matched the list of company with the financial information and then the R&D information. And then data includes the information of GPP supplier, of course. And then we made it full link database. I don't know whether I can explain the econometric part in detail or not, but please don't hesitate to ask me when you have the question for the estimation in the end. So for now, because of time limitation, I will just give you the general explanation. And even for the same company, we regard it as different observation, because sometimes one company can provide and sometimes they don't provide. That's why we just put it in different way. And then the final model was the Heckman's two-stage regression. So first step was whether the firm supply or not. And the second step was that if they supply, how much? And then what's the main factor to make them supply more? So those are the results. So as I mentioned, there are two steps. So this one is step one. So which factor can make them to supply? And then here is how much can make them supply more? And then to compare, I also used the general estimation. So like a robust ORS estimation. So we can see the result, but I will summary it in next slide. So we analyze the impact of firms' unique feature like a region or age and sectors and their financial characteristics, and then innovation in investments. And the dependent variable was supply or not, and then how much do they supply. So here is the result: longer history, and then higher sales. If the company is in manufacturing or construction sector instead of service, and there is more possibility to supply GPP. So those factors can make the company to supply GPP more. So we can check the promote factors. In detail, for the first step, so we identify the factor to induce the GPP supply. So as I already mentioned, the company history and sales, and then manufacturing and construction can make it more. This means that the possibility of GPP supply is low for the new company, and company in service industry means that there are some obstacles for the new company when they want to supply the GPP. So we need to consider this part. I mentioned it in the last part as the policy recommendation. And companies that invest more in innovation, of course, have a higher possibility to supply more GPP products. So this suggests that if a company invests in innovation, it is probably it obtain more GDP certificates, and this leads them to provide more GPP supply. And second part, we identify. So there are, you can see there are some company features, and then their financial characteristics. So we can determine, okay, this can make them more supply the GPP. So let me do some summary. So Korea's public procurement size is not small. Even when we compare it with the world level, our GPP, our public procurement amount is not. It's a big policy tool to promote some government sustainable policy. So Korea's public procurement market continuously grow in recent 10 years. And of course, this one is supporting SME and some innovative company as well. And then Korea especially introduced the GPP in 2005. And then internationally, the community interest in public procurement as a method of achieving sustainable development recently increased. So when I checked the previous study, some OECD company and the UN, it's related with the sustainable development goal. So they say the GPP is a really important tool to make it sustainable. So with this previous study and the international organizations recommendation, I think the big volume of this GPP, the public procurement, and the recommendation by the previous study, the GPP can be crucial rule to make the sustainable development system in Korea. And the result of the empirical analysis on company level as suppliers of GPP provide a guideline in understanding company. So as I mentioned, why did they get in the market, GPP market? And then what can promote them to provide more GPP? So when you think about it in opposite way, for new company and service industry, they are weak. So we need to promote them more. So we need to let them provide more GPP. And then, of course, to do this, we need another guideline or another policy. So it's important. And the innovation company, their rule is always important. And then regional deviation, because the Korea, the population intensity is very high near the metropolitan. So to develop the other area, GPP can be also important tool. And then we need to also think about the financial part. Why they don't have enough financial profit? I mean, they can also provide the GPP and they can also make some profit. So we need to make some balance for those parts. Of course, there are some limitations in my study. So for my further study, I want to check so about the analysis, the impact of GPP supply and GPP supplies amount on firms, productivity, innovation investments, and job creation. And then also there are some failure company, some company in the beginning, they try to supply GPP, but in somehow they are disappeared. They don't supply GPP anymore. So I could see many cases with the firm level data. So in the future, I want to check why do they give up to supply the GPP. So thank you for your listening, and then I'm happy to answer for your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yunhee. I may open the floor for discussion, asking participants if they have any questions concerning your research.
Okay.
Okay, Dagne, you have a question. Please go ahead. Well, you may write it or you may say it, whatever you wish. Okay, so Dagne is asking you if you can elaborate on the requirements to use the GPP.
Yes, in Korea, as I mentioned, there is a law, very strong law. So by the law, the Korean public institution and governments has to buy the GPP when they buy some product for themselves. So that's why the GPP volume has been increased. But so based on those results, we can target the weak suppliers, and then we can elaborate those ideas with the GPP policy in Korea.
Okay, thank you. Well, if I may use my discretion as a chair of a session, right? Empirically, of course, I have a couple of questions, right? And perhaps a couple of suggestions. So one question is basically if you have split your samples between large firms and small firms, right? So have you considered whether large firms may be more reactive to GPP than smaller firms or SMEs, right? So perhaps what you could do, you could rerun your workhorse regressions Heckman two-step, for split samples, one large firms and one either SMEs, or right? Because I mean that would be interesting to know, whether size, plays such a pivotal role, or in the sense that large firms may be more reactive, right, to GPP than smaller firms, right?
Yes.
But again, I liked your presentation, right? But I mean, can you address this, or are you working this, as a part of your work in progress?
Okay, Chairman, thank you for your question. I checked the list of company, and basically, you may all know that there are Samsung or Hyundai or some LG. So there are so big company in Korea. But basically, those big company, they don't participate in the government public procurement process, because government want to promote this chance for SME. So when you see the front beginning of my slide, there are some figure. So most of the supply are done by SME. So even there are some difference by the size of the company, but it's not so much. That's why I decided to pooling of them. But it's good suggestion. So for my further study, yes. So for example, there are some construction parts. Of course, in construction part, the size of company and paper company, their size are very different. So for my further study, it's very good suggestion. I want to divide the data set. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Okay, so we have a question from David Andres asking, is wondering if there has been any studies regarding how the increase in the volume of GPP has included effects in terms of wider dispersion in the private market supply, and has that increase in the volume been similar in the private sector supply?
No. In the system, we didn't consider the impact for the private sector because the system are different. So basically, the price what they supply is not so low. So if it's the competitive private market, mainly they want to provide more with low price. But here they are more care about the quality, and the price is not the priority when they consider their budget. So I mean, maybe I don't understand your question well, but if you have a further question, we can share the message or email. So I'm very happy. There is my information over email. You can contact me and I can share. I'm happy to answer more. Okay.
Okay, one further question was put forward by David asking, are companies that make a low price offer excluded from the procurement process on technical grounds for being non-compliant with GPP criteria?
I think for them the price may be important, but the GPP, there is some certification for GPP. So for them, the GPP certification is more important because the government has to buy the GPP products. So the price is less important for the buyers when they consider they are more care about the GPP certificate. So once you are the supply, you need to get the GPP certificate by the government. And with this, like green mark or, like ISO 2000 mark, there are some this kind of the mark for environmental or sustainability. So to supply GPP, first of all, the companies, they need to get this the mark by the government. So for them, the price is less important. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Yunhee. I would just like to ask the audience if there are further questions, if you could send them to Yunhee, right? Because we have to move forward with the presentations, right? So thank you very much, Yunhee. It was an excellent presentation. And now we are moving to the third presentation by Marco Caldeira on sustainable public procurement in Portugal, overview and recent developments. Now, Marco, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, brilliant. Perfect. Perfect.
I don't know if you can also see me. I can see myself.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thanks for the invitation. It is an honor to join. I'm sorry I was only able to join right now. I will try to share my screen. I hope I don't make any mess. Anyway,
okay, Marco, just to let you know, you have 20 minutes, right, for the presentation.
Okay, it will be a short presentation. Just there are 4 or 5 slides, not more. Just I'll try to. Sorry, no, this isn't working. I'm not being able to manage the share presentation. Anyway, I have.
So if you go to the bottom right part of
right,
the
okay.
Blackboard,
share content.
Share content.
Oh yes. Okay, let me try to. Sorry, I'll try to. What? this should be. Anyway, I made my presentation available to everyone, but in any event, it's better if everyone can see. Sorry for the delay. I'll try to. You are not seeing anything, are you?
No, not yet.
I'm not sharing. Okay. Let me just. Oh, really. Sorry for the mess. Anyway, but I can keep talking in any event. What would I would like to share with all of you in brief points is the following. We all know about the importance of green public procurement and using public procurement to pursue environmental goals and also social goals. I could quote the Concordia bus case or the or one more recent ones like Dutch coffee. But we all know that that's not the specific part of my presentation. In Portugal, the public procurement code was revised in 2017 in order to incorporate for the Portuguese legal framework the framework from the 2014 directives, and this revision made clear, it was not very innovative, but it made clear that public procurement should not only could but should be used to environmental goals, namely in regard to technical specifications, in regard to the selection of the bidders and the award of tenders. So from a strictly legal standpoint, no problem. The framework is compliant with the directives and is environmentally friendly. But and that's what brought me here. There is a big distance from theory to practice, meaning the framework is in theory suitable, but in practice a lot of issues arise because in the field, in the daily activity of awarding entities, the concern for environmental goals is not yet felt, meaning the government further to the revision of the public procurement code also approved a strategy for the environmental growth and sustainability for 2020. This is a resolution from the Council of Ministers from 2016. And the audit court recently in April this year made a survey to analyze whether in the field the public procurement procedures were actually being used to pursue environmental goals. And the conclusions were, unfortunately, but I would say not surprisingly, very pessimistic. The main conclusions, the main findings were that few entities actually use public procurement procedures to pursue economic environmental goals. I'm sorry. On the one hand, on the other hand, the few that actually care for the use of public contracts to protect the environment just set the bars well below standard, meaning when they say I practice green public procurement, this says that, well, in some procedures I require the goods to be recycled or the bidder to have a specific certification like ISO 9001 or an environmental impact assessment is to be carried out. So In short, few entities actually incorporate environmental concerns in public procurement procedures, and even the few ones who do it just to the minimum standard. So this is the main conclusion. Although the framework in theory allows and encourages awarding entities to use green public procurement, in practice, public procurement is quite often not used. Of course, this would require a more in-depth analysis, because the data is not there is not much data available, and it needs to be worked out. Public entities have the duty to report to a specific website named Portal Base, who is the website for the public procurement, who contains how many contracts are entered into each year, the respective value, and the counterparties. But regarding to green public procurement, the data available is not very accurate. But with this, bearing in mind these limitations of the available data, the overview, the scenario is not very encouraging. What can be the main causes for this? Well, there are a lot of causes. I would highlight 4. 2 of them were shared by the awarding entities themselves to the audit court. One of them is the one implicit disbelief in the role or potential of public procurement to actually make an impact and have any effect on protecting the environment, on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a general lack of awareness regarding the environmental tools that one awarding entity can use to, in a public procurement procedure, protect the environment. This also is related to the lack of professionalization of the public buyer, which is a common problem, at least in Portugal. Most of the public entities are not well trained and aware of the intricacies of the legal framework applicable to public procurement. These are the 2 main reasons that are pointed out by the awarding entities to the audit court. I would allow myself to add 2 more, and I would not say that they are more important than these ones, but they are relevant, I believe. On the one hand, there is an increasing budgetary pressure, meaning most of the tenders and public procurement procedures that are opened in Portugal, they are awarded based only the lower price. And even this is the majority of the cases. And even if, or even when the price is not the only factor, the only relevant criteria, it is still the most important criteria. It is the most relevant, the one in which is put more weight. So this obviously diminishes the space, the margin to incorporate green public procurement concerns in the procedure. On the other hand, in Portugal, around 90% of the procedures are invitation procedures. So they are not public open tenders, are invitation procedures, awarding direct award procedures to invitation to one company, or prior negotiation procedures with invitations to 3 or more companies. So they are not open, and they are mainly destined to small and medium enterprises, which in general are not very suited to they are not that sophisticated to address concerns regarding the the protection of environment, meaning the awarding entity itself is not very aware on how and by which means they can use public procurement to pursue environmental goals. And on the other hand, they also know that the market to which the invitation procedure is destined is not willing to respond well. They do not have the means, the knowledge, the technology, the technology, the sophistication to respond to their concerns. So these two, the budgetary pressure and the fact that the procedures are invitational procedures destined to small and medium enterprises, I believe are two additional causes for the insufficient implementation of green public procurement in Portugal. So, bearing this in mind, and I try to shorten the conclusions of the report from the audit court, which is is longer and more complex than this. What can we do? If this is the scenario, how can we improve? Well, there is no magical solution, no magical formula. I would add some suggestions of my own to try to open the debate. And what would I say in this regard? First of all, I believe this has to be led by the government in the first place, as the head of public administration, to approve a national strategy in which every awarding entity, every public administration body is involved, and set clear goals and deadlines, and grant them the resources to be able to actually pursue environmental goals in public procurement. One other suggestion could be turn green public procurement mandatory for, it could be a transitional period for 3 to 5 years, for instance, and it could be like an experience, a pilot project regarding some entities, some contracts, or at least demand that public companies, for instance, or central administration bodies, 20% of their contracts each year would have to incorporate environmental concerns, or contracts which price would be above a certain threshold could not be awarded only on the basis of the lower price, and would have mandatorily environmental concerns. This could be another way to increase awareness and try to have an impulse, the first step to actually have a future to a better procurement in the future. On the other hand, we could think of giving incentives, for instance, for access to European funding. This is quite recent. The discussion is very up to date these days. So if Europe is now willing to fight the pandemic of COVID-19, if Europe is willing to give funding to the countries, why not encourage or even oblige awarding entities to pursue, to incorporate environmental concerns in these acquisitions? The European Commission, in their statement of April 1st, emphasized that even though this is a situation of crisis and emergency, that does not prevent automatically the use of green public procurement. So, and even, for instance, a working group in the Commission regarding for the acquisition of textiles emphasized that the acquisition of textiles for the combat of the COVID-19 could actually incorporate environmental concerns throughout the whole procedure. meaning since the drafting of the technical specifications, to the selection of bidders, to the award of proposals. There are a lot of ways by which it can be used. On the other hand, and I'm almost finishing, I believe it would be, because this was a main issue in Portugal, it would be important to have means to increase awareness, meaning to make the problem present, make a concern on a daily basis for contracting entities, because most of the times each contracting entity is only concerned with their own contracts, and it's not their own contracts in an annual basis, like having a planning, a long-term planning. No, they think the next contract, so they do not have the overview, and if they don't have it regarding their own activity, much less they have it regarding the overall contracting carried out by other public entities. So what I would suggest would be to make information publicly available, which could demand awarding entities to have reinforced information duties regarding public procurement, meaning they have already to provide several information regarding their contracts to the portal base, which I mentioned earlier. So it is a question to make mandatory the sending of information regarding green public procurement criteria used. So it is available. Everyone can know who is using green public procurement, how, in which cases, and sometimes with which results. On the other hand, it would be important to have general guidelines or orientations, particularly because a lot of public entities do not have the knowledge, the means, the skills, the sensibility to be aware of the problems and to know which tools exist and how to use them better. So it would be important to have general guidelines and even a specific website in which good practices could be shared, or having a website with Q&As with most frequently asked questions and practical answers to guide awarding entities. And of course, training. Courses, formations, training destined to the public buyers in order to achieve as much as possible professionalization. This is the way to go, I believe, and in the future, better public procurement will require a professional buyer in the administration to carry out these procedures. Two final remarks. The Portuguese experience showed that framework agreements and centralized procurement was better suited to pursue environmental goals. So this could also be encouraged, I believe, because central purchasing bodies are professionals and are more used to deal with the public procurement regulations, and when they enter into framework agreements, they have the scale to use and actually have an impact when pursuing environmental goals. So framework agreements could also be encouraged in this regard. And most important, and this was one problem in Portugal, to monitor the results of these proposals. And it's not sufficient to alter the legal framework and to make manuals available and to give training courses if at the end of the day 1, 2, 3 years pass and no one sees if it is resulting, which problems are being dealt with, which solutions can be found. So this is a very latent problem, and in Portugal it is very serious. We believe that we draft a paper, it is law enforced, and so problem solved. No, the problem is beginning to be solved. So this is very important, and many of these tasks, like the general guidelines and orientations, the formation and training courses, and the monitoring, for instance, could be carried out by an independent body specialized in public procurement, alone or in coordination, for instance, with the National Environment Agency, if it exists. So to have a regulatory body, which is not a purchasing entity per se, but is trained and is able to guide the other awarding entities, could be helpful. So this is the summary of my presentation. I'm sorry I wasn't able to share it because I was trying to, and English is not my native language, so I was trying to think and speak at the same time when I was trying to attach the file. I'm sorry I couldn't made it available, but these were my overview on the Portuguese scenario and my modest suggestions. Of course, none of them is sufficient per se. Perhaps even all of them combined would not be enough, but we can, as I began to say, we cannot expect miracles, and I don't believe in revolutions and magical formulas that change the scenario from one day to another. I'm more fond of small but effective measures that day by day slowly can give us a result after a few time. It's not for tomorrow, but it's for the future for sure. Thanks so much for the invitation and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. It was a lovely presentation, right? There are two questions by David. David first asks whether you think it would help if there was a longer leading time for ambitious GPP so that suppliers can prepare. Sometimes there can be a lack of competition for ambitious GPPs. And the second question is that perhaps some additional formal training for public sector procurement officers would give them more confidence.
Thanks for the questions. They're both are excellent questions. Of course, when we deal with public procurement issues, competition is always the problem. In fact, in my paper, I quote a report coordinated by Roberto Caranta and Martin Dove, in which they suggest that the incorporation of environmental issues or concerns cease to be linked, if I interpret it well, cease to be linked to the object of the contract. Because, of course, this would incentivize the use of green public procurement, but the connection to the contract scope is the core of the public procurement. This is still seen with a bit of suspicion. When I mentioned earlier the increase in budgetary pressure, I had in my PowerPoint one other topic related, that is fear of litigation. In Portugal, one of the reasons that lead the procedures to be awarded on the lower price only is, of course, it's easier to analyze bids on that basis, and it tends to lead to savings, at least economic and immediate savings, but is also less prone to litigation, because when we add more subjective criteria like technical capacity or ability to pursue environmental goals, this can potentially increase litigation, and no public servant is willing to risk their neck in order to protect the environment. So yes to both. Yes, it is a problem, a never-ending problem, to know to which point I can use public procurement to incorporate environmental concerns without losing sight from what I wanted to achieve in the first place. If I want to buy a printing machine, the main goal is to buy a good printing machine that operates well. The fact that the toner is recyclable or the paper is recyclable, it's good, but it's not the core of the acquisition. So in small markets as Portugal, with a lot of with less sophistication, it can be a problem. If we have to have a balance. That's why I suggested earlier that although in theory all or almost all public contracts may incorporate environmental issues, perhaps we should start with the most important ones. Just perhaps if I want to buy a pen by 10 euros, it's not worth to have a lot of concerns whether the pen is recyclable or not. But in the big construction works, for instance, it makes all perfect sense. So even as a transition, as a gradual transition, it could make sense to encourage or make mandatory the use of green public procurement in bigger and more important and more complex contracts, to which the bidders typically will be also big companies that are not afraid to respond to environmental demands on the technical specifications. On the other hand, the trust is from the awarding entity is also the key. That's why I emphasize that training is very important. The awarding entity, when they know what they are doing, when they do not doubt that this is legally admissible, they are more willing to draft technical specifications and be more demanding from an environmental point of view with the market. A small and with low resources purchasing entity do not trust themselves to make good technical specifications, to launch tenders that are environmentally friendly, and so this encourages them. So professionalization would be the key in the future, I believe. I don't know if I answered the both questions, but I'm available to further clarifications.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco. Right, I would like to ask all participants for further questions if they could send them to your email, because we are running a little bit short on time. Right. Marco, thank you very much. Right, for the presentation. Right. So now we have the final presentation. Right, before the first day of the conference is over. Right. So this presentation, just gonna see. Now, can you please let me know if you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. So this paper, basically, it's not one paper. It's a companion with papers co-authored with Lela and with Tom Emery, right, from University of Western Australia, right. And here we are trying to understand the broader implications of e-procurement, right, on institutional quality and on the economic growth, drawing on three peculiar cases, one in Catalonia, another one in Singapore, and another two examples in Australia, right? So what institutional and policy scholars know that, if you try to think of a genuine long-run perspective, that in the long run, institutional and policy framework that does not promulgate low transaction costs and secure property rights will not be able to sustain long-run growth and social development, right? In a sense that sustained growth and high levels of development would be impossible, in the presence of either costly enforcement of contracts or, as a large strand of literature suggests, ineffective government administration. So not only countries or regions, but even cities that fail to implement growth-enhancing institutional reforms, they are condemned to economic stagnation and underdevelopment in the long run, right? So the question is the following: if inadequate institutional environment is to blame for the failure of sustained high rates of growth or institutional development, which policies can actually help pursue long-run economic development, right? So if I use the language of Trump, is there a magic bullet, right, that pulls the trigger, or is the process more persistent, right? So there are two contrasting views, right? So the first one is by Acemoglu and Johnson, right, who just believe that, you know, in the long run, it's the institutions of property rights that matter for economic growth, while contracting institutions like e-procurement, they appear to be less important because, you know, over time, agents might learn how to overcome and bypass these rules. Or, you know, as Glazer and the co-authors often say, you know, that, you know, countries or regions and cities that often escape poverty trap, they often escape it through good policies that are often pursued, you know, in the discretionary and, you know, like with dictatorial manner. So if regulatory policies matter for economic growth, I mean, what the evidence actually says, right? The idea of e-procurement, right, if I go a little bit further, right, the idea of e-procurement is to reduce, of course, as you know, a direct interaction between citizens and public officials, to reduce their power of discretion, you know, address issues of moral hazard, opportunism, associated adverse selection issues, right? So on one hand, you know, e-procurement can be sustainable in a sense of reducing the discretionary power of public officials, fostering accountability, improving transparency, and, you know, in some ideal world, you know, it might be able to harvest, you know, high quality public goods and deliver the necessary information to citizens and businesses, right? So if e-procurement eliminates opportunities for corruption ex ante, e-government may be an effective screening device, right, with a strong potential to raise economic growth and improve institutional development. But you know, as Marco was saying about the typical Latin problems, not everyone, you know, would agree that e-government may reduce corruption, right? For example, e-government or e-procurement may encourage pre-existingly corrupt officials, civil servants, or even business people, you know, to learn new ways and new tricks to overcome the barriers to rent-seeking opportunities, right? It may consolidate rather than solve the conflicts of interest, and because, you know, technology literate officials might be able to learn over time how to bypass electronic procedures that breeds even more corrupt behavior in the long run, right? And of course, when public officials lose access to power, when e-government or e-procurement is introduced, you know, they may still exert disproportionate impact in collective decision making, right? They can use alternative political technologies to preserve power holding through various channels of, you know, what Carlos Cartesini and Damiano Tomasi referred to as non-institutionalized policy influence, right? So in the end, you know, in the worst scenario, the net effect of e-procurement may be just the opposite of what we might expect, right? It might breed lower instead of higher institutional equality. It might even increase economic inefficiency, depress investment, distort public spending, right? It might even divert talent, right, from productive activities towards the rent-seeking endeavors, right? And it might also lead to unpredictable and volatile policy making without commitment, right? Now, the literature review essentially tells us, you know, that the literature is divided, right? So roughly one half, you know, of the existing studies suggest that, you know, e-procurement or e-government might deter corruption. The other suggests that basically it may even increase it, right? So if we go to the case of Catalonia, you know, in Catalonia until 2010, e-procurement was practically non-existent, you know, but then a series of legislative initiatives were passed, right? The most important of these was Public Recruitment Services Platform, right? Which configured like a single and complete portal for the dissemination of information of procurement activity, right? And likewise, you know, under additional auspices, you know, legislative initiatives were developed that, you know, paved way to a large-scale transition to public procurement, right? So what is our goal here? Our goal is to examine the contribution of e-procurement take up to institutional quality, right, and economic growth. So basically what we do, we estimate the effect of e-procurement implementation on growth and institutional quality using synthetic control estimator. But of course, to be able to defend how to say the key identifying assumptions, we would need to use parallel trends of institutional quality and economic growth as a reasonably reliable source of counterfactual, right? So basically, we are trying to estimate a scenario for the world that doesn't exist. And of course, because the counterfactual might be able to say, you know, what is the actual difference, you know, in the institutional quality between Catalonia and between the control group, right? It never, of course, passed procurement. So to give you a little bit of the mathematical and the model flavor, right, we want to know basically how the effect of implementing e-procurement evolves over time. This is here designated by the lambda parameter, right? But of course, the problem is that the counterfactual is unobserved, not only to the lawyer, but also to the econometrician, right? So we estimate a counterfactual growth trajectory to obtain a consistent representation of lambdas, right? So if you try to look into synthetic control estimator, we want to construct the counterfactual as a weighted combination of all the regions and or countries that never implemented e-procurement. I think beforehand there was a presentation by Dirk who mentioned and revoked the benchmarking in public procurement, right, document by the World Bank, right? Now that document is very valuable because basically we've done some of the scrapping, right, and tried to identify actually which countries have no e-procurement in place, and there are some who are, right? So the effect here is fairly easy to demonstrate. So we are trying to look for a combination of countries, right, that have the same characteristics in terms of level of development, economic growth trajectory, physical development, institutional history, institutional development, then Catalonia, except that they never implemented e-procurement, right? Now, but of course, this is where to start, right? Because how on earth are we able to measure institutional quality at the subnational level, right? I mean, there is a nice data set by Dijkstra, Charon, and Lapuente from 2019. So what they did, they tried to measure governance at the subnational level, right? It's a welcome step forward, but when we did the first regressions and data collection, it's not particularly useful because we only have 3 observations spanning across 10 years. That's literally nothing we can help. So our approach is alternative. Let's say that we want to exploit the geographic differences between Catalonia and the rest of the world. So again, let's try to imagine a world that doesn't exist. And a world that doesn't exist is a Catalonia that would be an independent country, right? So what would that mean? So we try to assess Catalonia against other countries that never implemented e-procurement. How we do it? We first look at the level of institutions, especially government effectiveness, that is expected in basically given Catalonia's pre-existing physical geography and exogenous determinants, factors like average temperature, latitude, longitude, sea axis, etc., right? So, and then we basically leverage this institutional quality against other countries and simply parse out the residual component of government effectiveness, right? That not only is specific to Catalonia, but it's also, of course, differs compared to other Spanish comunidades autónomas, right? So what we have from the document benchmarking public procurement, we were effectively able to identify 30 countries with no e-procurement in place until the year 2018, basically, and then we add Catalonia, right, of course, to the sample. Now, our intuition is the following. If e-procurement tends to improve governance quality, residuals for Catalonia should increase compared to the rest of the world where e-procurement has not been implemented. In a sense, residualized government effectiveness should improve over time, given what one would expect with Catalonia's geographical fundamentals, right? Okay, so if I try to give you a little bit of an overview of the residual, so here the vertical axis shows the expected value of the residual of Catalonia and all the 30 countries without e-procurement. Actually, they range from the best in the world in terms of institutional quality, like Switzerland, like Israel, like Belgium to some extent, right, to the worst, like countries like Iraq, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Yemen, that score poorly, in terms of institutional quality, right? And then you can see that basically Catalonia, before e-procurement take-up, it was ranked pretty highly. So the institutional framework in terms of government effectiveness in Catalonia is much better compared to what one would expect in a place with similar geographical conditions. Now, after e-procurement, Catalonia moved even further. So basically, it came just next to Switzerland in terms of institutional quality residual. Now, of course, it's nowhere near the level of Switzerland, right? But compared to other countries, it ranks pretty high. So what we want to do first, before as we did in our previous paper, first we need to test the parallel trend assumption, right? So is there any opportunity for us to enter the analysis? And basically, when we regress institutional quality residuals regarding government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption, we can see that there is a very strong evidence of a parallel trend between Catalonia, right, and before the introduction of reforms, right, only for government effectiveness, but slightly less for regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption. And in a sense, this is something what we might expect. Of course, rule of law, might not be so heavily impacted by e-procurement as government effectiveness, right? And this is actually what we saw. So basically, this is before we do synthetic controls. Here is a simple difference in difference. So with simple difference in difference estimator, we are able to figure out that residual government effectiveness in Catalonia post e-procurement reforms improved significantly, right? By about between 2 and 3 standard deviations of the residual, of course, which is large, right? And of course, the estimate and the coefficient is statistically significant at 1%. So we can say that, there is some preliminary evidence of large and pervasive improvement in residual government effectiveness in response to e-procurement take-up. Now, even when we consider dynamic estimates, so apart from all of the covariates like GDP per capita, population densities and demographic covariates, we also add the lagged residual. Now, why is this important? Because, of course, if you are living in a place that inherits bad institutional quality, it's quite likely that, policy effect might be constrained by the inherited bad institutional quality. Now, even when we control for the lagged residuals, you can see that, the effect of implementing e-procurement is still large, about half of what we found in the static estimates, right? And of course, it's still statistically significant. So we can see that government effectiveness improved, but at the same time, we don't find significant but marginal evidence of slightly lesser control over corruption, right? So in a sense that, so yes, government's public sector became more effective, after e-procurement was introduced, but at the same time, the control of corruption deteriorated a bit, right? But not significantly, right? But of course, so if you want to figure out, how the institutional or economic magnitude of the effect looks like, we need synthetic control. So here in table 4, we match Catalonia with the rest of the world. We can see that the synthetic control group for Catalonia has similar level of past government effectiveness, right? Similar level of political instability, instability, right? Similar level of GDP per capita, and also similar geographic and institutional covariates, right? So if you try to look at synthetic controls here, we have the baseline results. So the solid line is basically the observed institutional quality residual with respect to government effectiveness, and the dashed line is basically the counterfactual. So as you can see here, after e-procurement was implemented after 2009, the residuals improved significantly, while the counterfactual basically is declining. So that tells us, that the introduction of e-procurement possibly led, to widespread and substantial improvement in government effectiveness, right? Now, of course, you might wonder, so which countries are best able to reproduce the trajectory of residual government effectiveness of Catalonia? Well, not surprisingly, the country that matches best with pre-reform Catalonia is Belgium, right, with 60% weight share. Now, unfortunately, this is by a couple of countries that are not institutionally really mature. These two are Côte d'Ivoire with 20% and Botswana, which is better, with 11%, and followed by Switzerland with about 9%. So even once we exclude each of these countries from the control group, we find that basically excluding them does not affect the direction and magnitude of the counterfactual scenario. For example, when we exclude all of the original countries from the control group, right, we find it still, of course, it's a combination of Belgium, Namibia, and Yemen with 3% weight share, right, that can best reproduce Catalonia's government effectiveness, right? Now, what we do then, then we do a kind of in-time placebo analysis, right? With in-time placebo analysis, we want to show that the counterfactual is not driven by some alternative institutional or policy shock, right? There were many, right? But the one that actually we do consider is the Catalan independence referendum in 2014, after which, Catalonia plunged into a domestic political crisis. So even when we when we falsely assign the year of e-procurement policy to the Catalan independence referendum, we are able to see the evidence of no effect, and the sense that, the break between the real and synthetic Catalonia occurs in the year 2010, right? So basically the D panel here tells us that, the probability that the observed gap, the estimated gap happens by chance is basically about 10% by the end of the post-treatment year, right? Okay, then we also do in-space placebo analysis, right, where we apply synthetic control estimator to all the unaffected countries, and we are able to see that after 2010, the positive gap appears to be very specific to Catalonia, and it's not perceivable elsewhere in all the other countries that never implemented e-procurement, right? And that tells us, of course, that perhaps maybe maybe the effect that we're looking at is actually the effect of e-procurement on government effectiveness, right? So as you can see, the probabilities that all of this would happen by chance decline in a rather uniform fashion, down to the present day, right? Okay, so I still have, according to my time, I still have 4 minutes, right? So I will try to show what we are also working on in case of Singapore and Australia. So in case of Singapore, we're trying to look at whether e-procurement improves economic growth or not, right? Possibly, well, you definitely know that, Singapore in 1998, was the country that implemented a very large-scale public procurement system, which was hailed for its transparency, monstrous efficiency at times, right? And of course, relative simplicity at the same time, right? So what you observe here in case of Singapore, right? Of course, some preliminary studies suggest, that government expenditure was lowered significantly, in response to all the savings associated with the procurement. So what we want to know is whether Singapore is better off in terms of economic growth. Well, we apply synthetic control estimator with a similar methodology. We have about 105 countries in the donor pool, right? We are able to, of course, to exploit a larger battery of covariates, factors like social capital, civil law, export orientation, level of economic freedom, some demographic covariates, right? And then we are able to show here, when we cross-validate predictors, right, which shows that, past GDP per capita appears to be way most important predictor, right? Here we show that Singapore, after the implementation of e-procurement, right, it was implemented in the year 1998, appears to be significantly better off in terms of improved economic growth, right? So the improvement is really large, about 108%, right, down to the present day. And we show that the countries in the control group are the ones that best reproduce Singapore in terms of growth characteristics. It consists of Hong Kong, it's nothing unexpected, right? Plus Malta, yes, another common law jurisdiction, plus Nepal and South Korea, right? Now, even if you look at inference, right, you can see that the post-1998 gap between Singapore and the rest of the gap appears to be very unique to Singapore and doesn't appear to be perceivable elsewhere. So we might be able to say that, again, e-procurement is something that, improved Singapore's economic growth tremendously. In the revised version, we are also trying to compare Singapore with the US states, right, instead of other countries. And of course, the results are pretty similar, right? So in a sense that, we can say that the proportion of countries with the same post-treatment effect of e-procurement as the one obtained by Singapore is very low, between 2 and 4%, right? And of course here we show that the post versus pre-1998 prediction error is pretty large for Singapore and pretty close to the top, right? And of course the p-values confirm our story, right? As you can see, the p-values here are uniformly low, within 10% bounds, suggesting that, the effect of e-procurement, again, is specific to Singapore and is possibly not attributed to alternative policy shocks, right? Then we also do in-time placebo analysis with falsely assigned date of e-procurement intervention. And as in case of Catalonia, we find that the placebo years do not matter that much. We also undertake leave one out analysis, excluding each donors, as in case of Catalonia, and find that the results remain unaffected, right? Okay, now in the last 2 minutes, I would like to jump to the impact of e-procurement on economic growth in case of Australia, right? Now, Australia has varying governments' public procurement policies. They are managed independently at the national or federal, subnational, and municipal level, right? And the combined total is about 30% of the GDP, right? But, given some constitutional limitations, the implementation of procurement policies has been rather slow, right? But we exploit two reforms. One undertaken by the government of New South Wales, which was also discussed partially by David Andres, in his presentation, and another one by Western Australia. So the nutshell about the New South Wales reform that, actually it was later on it was found out that, by financial audits that, it's characterized by very poor compliance, right? And that there were also about 30% of public inquiries were indicated with corrupt conduct, right? By contrast, Western Australian procurement reform that began in 2002 was independently funded and implemented by the state government. And it was also hailed for its efficiency, for its transparency, right? And a follow-up report by the Department of Treasury found that, you know, quantifiable savings were about almost $500 million Australian dollars between 2003 and 2008, right? With a net investment of only about 31 million, right? So we want to know if that basically if the two contrasts, if the contrast between two reforms, you know, is able to be detected, you know, in terms of differential economic growth. So in a sense, what we do, we match Western Australia and New South Wales with the rest of the world, you know, in a very similar manner, right? Just to give you a nutshell, because I'm running out of time, if you look at synthetic control groups as a combination of other countries, New South Wales and Western Australia load heavily on New Zealand and United States. That possibly goes to their common law background, right? And the results actually show the following. So the implementation of government procurement reform in New South Wales, as we expect, you know, given the the indications of corrupt practices, have no effect on economic growth. By contrast, Western Australia, as you can see in the right part of the panel, right, tends to improve significantly over time, giving evidence of a structural break. So without the procurement, you know, the economic growth trajectory of Western Australia would slightly be considerably worse off, right? Now we also put our differential trend assumptions to the test. So are we able to see that, you know, the change, there's a statistically significant change in the slope of the growth curve in New South Wales versus Western Australia? The short answer is yes. Yes for Western Australia, no for New South Wales, right? Okay, and then we also apply in-space placebo analysis. Again, find that, you know, Western Australia appears to be specific and unique. New South Wales doesn't, right? It's also apparent in the p-values. As you can see in the case of New South Wales, there is absolutely no evidence of the positive growth impact of e-procurement, right? In case of Western Australia, there is, right? And in the same way, we falsely apply the policy here, right? Exclude individual donors, and again find that these effects remain untainted. We also reduce the pre-treatment time span and find no effect, right? And we also basically use the regions from the common law jurisdictions, you know, like UK regions, US states, Canadian provinces as control groups. Here again, we find that, you know, as in case of Western Australia, that, you know, the effect is positive. In case of New South Wales, the effect is definitely not, right? Okay, so this is in a nutshell, you know, how our patient actually looks like, right? With common law jurisdictions, with synthetic control groups, you can see that, of course, a combination of states such as Florida and Michigan, you know, best reproduce New South Wales, Nevada and Georgia best reproduce Western Australia. And also in case of Western Australia, we would like to say that the effect is not driven by the mining boom, right, which occurred in WA around the year 2003, right? So e-procurement matters, you know, but it depends on how it's if it's well designed and enforced along transparent guidelines, you know, it might reduce transaction costs further, right? If it is implemented in a mediocre way, as in case of New South Wales, you know, it definitely not leads to improved economic growth, right? Okay, so this is where I will stop, right? And I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to open the floor for questions, right?
Okay, are there any questions? Or if there are not at this moment, maybe better to address them later on an email. Okay, Thomas and me obviously have a discussion here in the forum.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
But in any case, if there are no outstanding questions, I would like to thank you for the chairmanship very much, Rob. That was very efficient.
I do have one question.
Okay, perfect.
I do have one question, and I'm well aware on the fact that I'm the co-author, so this is probably a terrible question to ask, but there weren't many numbers that were thrown out there. Are you able to elaborate on what the actual empirical evidence is of the benefits of less corrupt e-procurement in terms of between Catalan, between Singapore and between WA/New South Wales?
Okay, so essentially, I mean, yes, that wasn't a lot. I mean, we didn't put this out, but essentially what we could do, you know, we could reapply, you know, the residual components, you know, for control of corruption, right, and for government effectiveness. And basically, we haven't done this estimation yet, but we could do, you know, in the same way that, you know, we could match WA, New South Wales, and Singapore with the rest of the world, right? But we haven't done that right so far, right? I mean, essentially, initially I would I mean, I don't know what to expect, but I would expect, you know, the results to be slightly similar to what we have found earlier, right? But I mean, I don't know. We have to run those regressions still, right?
Okay, perfect. So if that was the only question, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you once again, Rok. And to all the participants who've hold on with us for this long day, I will take these 5 brief minutes, even less, just to close the conference, because I have some closing remarks to make. So I've been working a lot for a whole year with sustainable public procurement, but more specifically green public procurement. And what we've seen today was a beautiful mix of exactly the issues that I found in my own research. Like, by pure coincidence, today was an expression of what is happening regarding the green and sustainable public procurement. The need for professionalization, right? So the need for the professionals to enter into the debate and to co-create the procedures. The necessity of tackling sustainability hotspots, starting regarding the green public procurement and sustainable public procurement for where it matters the most. So where we have the most impact. In the words of Marco, like he said, not buying the most sustainable red pen, but maybe starting with the construction industry and going from there on, and trying to familiarize the public procurers in the most important fields. Making sure that the public procurers also understand this is not a thing of preference anymore, but that this is a thing of international obligations, and this was commented throughout the day. A very important point to make. The vast need for cross-border cooperation and learning, which has been really not present in public procurement, is now seen. And we've been discussing that throughout the day, I think. And at the end of the day, talking about the fact that green public procurement can insert greater corruption, Rok and Thomas and me basically started doing empirical research and saying there are tools that we can use to eliminate that greater corruption, so that stops being kind of an excuse as to why we shouldn't implement sustainable public procurement. So with those final thoughts, I would like to leave you here. All the presentations are going to be available after the conference, and I will be glad to share it with the participants and with presenters. Also, the video is going to be available. Please share any comments and questions that you have, either with the Sustainable Company Project or with the particular speaker, and hope to see many more debates like this and further research being done on the topics that were revealed today. So I wish you a pleasant rest of the afternoon, and see you again tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you
You
very
too.
much.